released March 1st, 1923. What you're watching is a clip from a film titled Flames of Passion, the only film with existing footage from a little studio that once existed in Beaverton, Oregon, out west from Portland. The studio was primarily known as Premium Picture Productions and later J.J. Fleming Productions. It once stood just south of the city's high school in an area that you'd never guess was once a studio space in a land somewhat removed from the hustle and bustle of that time. I walked through here, shooting video back in 2019, but at the time all I really knew about the place was whatever I could find on IMDb at the time, as well as a few 1 to 2 sentence blips online related to Beaverton's history. But now, while Premium Pictures' first production officially didn't release until early 1923, its origins date back to 1920. While Hollywood was already becoming the place to be if you wanted a career in film, other places, like Portland, felt they had a chance to compete with them. Portland, and Oregon for that matter, boasted of their natural beauty and lighting that were tailor-made for the world of cinema. And among those feeling Oregon had a chance to compete was J.J. Fleming, who, along with a few others, founded and announced their new production company at the start of 1921, with the focus on selling stock in their company. With the fact that they'd taken out $250,000 in stock, this only made sense. Fleming stood at the top of the studio as its functioning president. F.K. Masters, a local attorney and former head of a transportation company, took the spot of vice president, while H.J. Shoulderman, the state corporation commissioner, held the position of treasurer. The studio also had 3 listed directors, so this new setup was no joke. Among the directors in particular at the start was Dr. G.E. Watts, who will come back to the story, just not until the end. While the studio would ultimately be built in Beaverton, when the studio was technically established, they did not yet know where it would be located. Initially, they just had an office, located in Suite 402 of the Wilcox Building, which still stands today at Southwest 6th and Washington, in the heart of downtown Portland. They had lofty aspirations. They planned on being up and shooting by the fall, with the hopes of producing at least 4 feature films a year with nationwide distribution. They would ultimately be successful in this. When I first learned about the existence of this studio, I assumed their pictures were so small and obscure that they likely didn't play beyond the Pacific Northwest, but they actually played all over the country. Despite their initial hopes, progress was far slower than planned, with no actual productions or even a studio being up and going for the duration of 1921. Construction on the studio itself would finally start in the summer of 1922, when a 33-acre property, previously known as the Concannon Estate, was bought by the company. Construction began in June, with plans to begin shooting their first film in July, hoping to utilize as much of the summer season as they could. Within the completed studio was a massive 90-foot by 200-foot stage space. The project cost a grand total of $60,000 to complete, or just over $1 million in today's money. The studio building itself was located close to the intersection of Southwest 6th and Erickson in Beaverton, a residential neighborhood today. And once production on film started, the studio provided jobs to locals who appeared in films as extras. Once the construction began, even that took longer than expected. But Premium made it work by shooting on location beforehand at other sites for their first film titled The Flash, a film so obscure it barely has any information on IMDb. Most of the crew personnel were brought up from a company based out of Bisbee, Arizona, and J.J. Fleming made sure that they would have strong acting talent on hand from the get-go. The first actors mentioned as being brought on at Premium were Jack Livingston, Mary Wynn, Hugh Saxon, Caroline Brunson, Eva Novak, and Molly Malone. There is no evidence Novak or Malone ever appeared in one of Premium's films, and Saxon and Brunson only appeared in one film each, and much later on. But Jack Livingston and Mary Wynn would become fixtures in several of their productions. By August 1922, and the shooting of The Flash, the film's two main leads were George Larkin and Ruth Stonehouse, probably the two most well-known actors to frequently appear in Premium's films. Larkin's acting career dated back to 1908, with him being mostly known for his dancing ability and his stunt work. He appeared in over 150 films, with his last one being in 1931. His wife, Ollie Kirby, was also an actor who worked with Larkin writing screenplays on the side. She appeared in nearly 100 films herself, from 1913 to 1926. Ruth Stonehouse started her career as a child dancer in Arizona before signing on with Universal in 1916. Her output was astonishing, appearing in almost 200 films between 1911 and 1928. This included 32 films in 1913, 38 films in 1915, and 41 films in 1914. And something fairly remarkable for its time, she also wrote and directed several films while being a co-owner at S&A Studios, perhaps best known for producing numerous Charlie Chaplin shorts. She was also married to a man named Felix Hughes, uncle to a fellow by the name of Howard Hughes. Upon coming to Portland, after doing plenty of work around the country, Stonehouse would describe Oregon in the following: "I cannot understand why other companies have not capitalized upon the advantages of this territory. There could be no more ideal spot for picture production." Stonehouse was a team player as well. She even willingly used a car at filming locations to prep and touch up her makeup. Premium's existence, with lights on, sound running, and camera rolling, happened on August 22, 1922, with a shoot at a police station. This may have been the main police headquarters, located at Southwest 2nd and Oak, but I cannot say for sure. Notorious Portland police chief at the time, Leon Jenkins, hammed it up with the production crew, even handing actor Frank Whitson his own badge to wear as Whitson was playing a police chief in the film. Several of Portland's own police force played officers in the film. Some of them even faced mockery by people on the streets when they were seen with face makeup on and colored-in eyebrows while they were walking their beat. On this first day, the crew also shot along the Ford Street Bridge, which once stood where the Vista Bridge now stands, in the Goose Hollow area not far from Washington Park, and then they moved down and shot a bit along the waterfront. Despite starting production in late August, the film was completed and an edited cut for an early presentation was established in September to be shown at the Rivoli Theater in downtown Portland. This 50-minute feature was directed by William James Craft, who directed films up until his death in 1931. He directed one other film solo for Premium, The Way of the Transgressor, in 1923, as well as co-directing 2 films with Harry G. Moody, who himself was involved in directing 8 of Premium's pictures. The Flash was also written by a man named George Hively, who wrote 3 of the pictures produced by Premium. He went on to become an editor in Hollywood, with his editing credits including the 1935 version of Three Musketeers, Love Affair, Abe Lincoln in Illinois, and the iconic 1938 film Bringing Up Baby. Even before its release to the general public, the Portland area was abuzz with excitement about The Flash, feeling like cinematic prosperity in that location had finally begun. Upon the completion of The Flash, J.J. Fleming was quoted to say, amongst the excitement, "Well, we're here, and we're here to stay." If only that were the truth. This is gonna wet the whistle of many a old Hollywood film historian, film buff type place I'm about to take you. I don't know what's there now. There may be nothing. But I discovered this, like so many other things, just in passing, unplanned, and I knew if I came out Beaverton way, I was absolutely going to have to visit this spot. Is this it? Yeah? This is it. So this is still Erickson right here. And then this cross street, it's 5th Avenue on this side, but it becomes 6th Avenue on this side. It's all residential now. So I just passed through the intersection of 6th and Erickson right here, located west of Erickson, which is this side of the street, and approximately at where 6th is. So this whole general area here, kind of behind me, and to my right, your left, if you're watching it, because you're looking the opposite direction of me. This, for about 4 years, was the site of a film studio and a film lot. But yeah, it's amazing to think that there was a film studio right here, out here in Beaverton. You know, we're a couple miles west of Portland. We're over the West Hills. You know, it's crazy that in such a random area that there used to be a silent film studio. And of course, I'm a filmmaker. I'm a lover of film history. So when I discovered that, I knew whenever I got anywhere near this part of town, I was going to have to pass by that little area. And you can pass by it too if you're in the area. It's right past the intersection if you're going south. It's just south of the intersection of 6th and Erickson Avenue here in Beaverton. It's south of 6th and west of Erickson. That little area that, again, is all it's all residential now, which doesn't really surprise me. Again, you know, population has been growing west of Portland exponentially over the past several decades. So anywhere that used to be something commercial that isn't anymore, odds are there's something residential going on there. But I really wanted to bring you guys that little piece of history. September 1922 also brought on the start of production on Premium's second film, initially titled The Firebrand, a picture focused on the life of lumberjacks, something rather fitting for the state of Oregon. The film would also go under the title of A Woman's Secret, but would ultimately go under the name of the aforementioned Flames of Passion. Craft and Moody split directing work on this 50-minute piece, which featured a larger cast than The Flash did. This included the man who appeared in more of Premium's films than anyone else, Al Ferguson. He would appear in 11 of Premium's films and even took over directing, holding those reins for 4 of the studio's later pictures. Ferguson's career is really quite remarkable, having appeared in over 300 films from 1912 to 1959. Perhaps what's most striking about his career is that by the 1930s he was relegated to mostly bit and uncredited parts, but he kept working. His uncredited roles include appearances in the 1935 version of Les Miserables, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Random Harvest, The Picture of Dorian Gray, Gaslight, The Big Clock, East of Eden, A Place in the Sun, and Sunset Boulevard. Quite the body of work. Oh, and here's a still of him trying to grab one of the greatest scumbags in the history of Hollywood. Yes, that is a young John Wayne. A 5-reeler film, the existing version of Flames of Passion is missing its first reel, but that's better than having nothing. Aside from this incomplete film, all we have to recall the rest of Premium's work is a few pictures. George Larkin's work in particular stunned onlookers, including a story reported in papers of a fight he got into on set with another actor. This culminated with Larkin being thrown violently through a set window. Onlookers gasped with shock and concern, and then director Kraft yelled cut. Turns out the fight was all part of the movie. Larkin's other power moments working for Premium included dangling from a schooner at 50 feet above the water with his hands tied together. During a forest fire scene in Flames of Passion, the short but stocky Larkin managed to throw one actor over a shoulder and then Ruth Stonehouse over the other and carry them both to safety. By the conclusion of Flames of Passion, preparations were already in the works for their next film, tentatively titled The Cleanup. Described as a crime film starring Larkin and Stonehouse, I can only assume this ended up being the film The Way of the Transgressor, a criminal gang-centered picture starring those two. This film also featured a performance by Laura Anson, who worked in a mix of films during the early 1920s, the last known being The Way of the Transgressor. IMDb also lists a William Vaughn Moody as playing a character named Spider. The only problem with this is that Moody died way back in 1910 due to complications from a brain tumor. What's interesting is, according to various pieces of information, Premium Pictures produced a film in 1922 called The Range Patrol. In addition to being one of multiple films by this Oregon-based film studio that takes place in Arizona, it appears this film was released around September 1922. This is interesting as there's little mention of its production, and with even The Flash having an official release date in 1923, The Range Patrol appears to be the first of the studio's films to be released to the public, even though it wasn't the first one produced. The implication here is that this film was being shot while, or even before Flames of Passion was being shot, and yet it features a different cast, including the likes of Al Ferguson and two other actors, Jack Livingston and Mary Wynn. The Way of the Transgressor would mark the end of George Larkin and Ruth Stonehouse's experiences with Premium, and it appears Jack Livingston and Mary Wynn were their replacements as the studio's focal leading man and leading lady. Jack Livingston acted in over 50 films over the duration of his career, with that starting in 1913. His last films would mostly be those done for Premium, with his last known official film being done in 1924. With the onset of the talking pictures, he left the industry, becoming a welder and later the proprietor of a brassiere shop in Los Angeles, before passing away in 1944. Mary Wynn had a somewhat similar career, only not as long. Starting in 1914, she had a decent career up until her many appearances in films by Premium Pictures, Her career would also fizzle out after this period, with her last two known films being premium ones. One of her earliest roles was a bit part in The Birth of a Nation as a 13-year-old. When she passed away in 2001, she was the last known living member of that film's cast. Another reason why films such as The Flash and Flames of Passion had later release dates, even though they were done well before 1922 was over, had something to do with a deal struck with Independent Pictures Corporation at the start of 1923. After September, work at the studio had stagnated, reportedly due to struggles filling in roles for their next film. This is interesting as the three leads from 1922's The Range Patrol, Jack Livingston, Mary Wynn, and Al Ferguson, would serve as their leads in most of the studio's future projects. So why there was such a struggle in late 1922 to fill roles is anyone's guess. I almost wonder if the real reason was that the studio was struggling financially and needed some help Independent Pictures may have provided. The contract signed in this deal called for Premium Pictures to have a whopping 12 five-reel films done in 1923 alone. They actually did come fairly close, although this is likely why their 1922 projects were delayed, as they were included among the 12. And thus, The Flash, Flames of Passion, and The Way of the Transgressor are regarded as 1923 releases. At this time, it was also mentioned that Premium had completed another film by the name of The Timber Bride. There's officially no known film by this name in Premium's catalog, and considering the name, I wonder if this was the working name for the studio's next release, which was titled The Power Divine, which is about a man from the mountains falling in love with a girl from a neighboring family. Man from the mountains, falling in love, Timber Bride? Makes sense to me. Either way, Flames of Passion was officially released March 1st, 1923, while The Power Divine was released exactly 1 month later, on April Fool's Day. By July of this same year, the studio put out Crashing Courage, the story of rangers trying to track down a gang of drug smugglers. This was another film starring Jack Livingston, while featuring an actress named Edith Hall. Crashing Courage is her only known acting credit. And while the studio was on a roll, a couple months later in October, they put out The Vow of Vengeance, a Western-style story following a cowboy out for vengeance against the man who killed his friend. This would be another piece starring Jack Livingston. The one other credited actor in the film was the most well-known actor ever to appear in a picture for Premium, Edward Everett Horton. With a career spanning almost 50 years and nearly 200 credits, Horton appeared in films such as two different versions of Holiday, The Front Page, Top Hat, Here Comes Mr. Jordan, and Arsenic and Old Lace before having a relatively successful television career in his later years. But anyone who knows old cinema knows the name of Edward Everett Horton. And once, this little suburban film studio was able to get their hands on him. A month later, November, marked the release of Scars of Hate, a film that took place in Arizona, and New York for that matter. But I can only assume it was still at least partially filmed in Oregon. This one featured the recurring trio of Livingston, Ferguson, and Wynn. And to round out the year was The Frame Up, a film about the Secret Service and train robbers, which was released in December. It was another one featuring Livingston, Ferguson, and Wynn. It also featured actor Hugh Saxon in his only appearance in a Premium film, even though he was one of those actors mentioned as a player when the studio first started. Saxon had a relatively successful career spanning 1914 to 1936, with his first film appearance being an uncredited role in the early Chaplin film Tilly's Punctured Romance. The frame-up also marked the third and last film put out by Premium, written by Louis V. Jefferson, who wrote for 115 films between 1915 and 1936. He was a very interesting person, claiming his writing talents were empowered by looking into a crystal ball. He also claimed to have the talent of automatic writing, or spirit writing, the ability by someone to produce written words without consciously writing. Apparently, you just hold on to the writing implement and let the spirits out there manipulate your hand. And despite not being released until 1924, by the end of 1923, the studio had completed another film. This was a film about the mining world, titled Beaverton, another Jack Livingston vehicle. In fact, it would be his last with Premium. Needless to say, 1923 had by far been the studio's most successful year. Several movies, and all being distributed to theaters across the country. Despite the stagnation of late 1922, it appeared Premium Pictures was back on a roll again. But that wouldn't last for long, at least not under its original name. While general information on the studio would imply it was always known as Premium Picture Productions, such is actually not accurate. In February 1924, under listed new corporations, an FCF Feature Films was listed, based out of Beaverton and established by J.J. Fleming, cinematographer J.C. Cook, and Al Ferguson. FCF, Fleming, Cook, Ferguson. While the early 1924 release, Beaverton, is regarded as a Premium Picture release, the next film they put out, Harbor Patrol, released in September 1924, is listed as an FCF feature. This clearly indicated, at least to me, trouble on the horizon. 1923 was long gone, and so was that deal with independent pictures. I wonder what state this left the studio in, especially since they changed the whole thing up early in 1924 and did not have their next release until September of that year. Little is known of Harbor Patrol, other than the fact that Al Ferguson starred in it. The film's director isn't even known for certain, but I'm personally led to believe there was at least a 50-50 chance that Ferguson himself may have directed the film. My reasoning for this is, from this point on, Al Ferguson directed all but one of the studio's remaining projects. All that said, it does appear the studio began picking up speed again as they would manage to release 2 more films before the year was over. The first was Shackles of Fear, released in November 1924. IMDb lists this as both a Premium Picture and a J.J. Fleming production. This suggests sometime between September and November of that year that the studio's name changed from FCF to J.J. Fleming Productions. Shackles of Fear is another film with a lumberjack bend to it. It also featured a Frank Clark, who appeared in 220 films between 1910 and 1935. It also featured an actor named Les Bates, who appeared in several films during the 1920s before dying in a car accident in 1930. And another actor in the film was Pauline Curley, making the first of 2 appearances that she had for the studio. Never quite hitting the big time, her career slowly fizzled out by the end of the 20s. Her second appearance came in the next film, put out a month later, December 1924, The Trail of Vengeance. She starred in this one alongside Al Ferguson, who also directed. This would be the first film listed solely as a J.J. Fleming production. Going into 1925, things didn't stall. January 15th of that year saw the release of Phantom Shadows, a film about a man's efforts to get out from under the thumb of crime while falling in love. This film marked a joint directorial venture between Al Ferguson and a Francis J. Grandin, a man who directed 130 films between 1912 and 1925 before passing away in 1929. This film also featured a man by the name of Ferdinand Schuman Henk. He would appear in 75 total productions over his career, and it all began with this little film. We'll be getting back to him. Another month passed, and another film. February 1925 saw the release of Scarlet and Gold, another Al Ferguson vehicle that was directed solely by Francis J. Grandin, his last film. The studio had gone from another period of stagnation to releasing 5 films in almost as many months. They were on the move again. Fleming himself had even made the perhaps overly ambitious statement that he planned on producing 16 more features in an indefinite future. One of the actors he planned to bring on was a man named Forrest Taylor, whose acting career was somewhat like Al Ferguson's, only the steroided-up version. This man appeared in almost 500 different productions, and yet oddly had been out of the acting game nearly a decade when J.J. Fleming called on him. He would gradually resume acting, just not with Fleming when all was said and done, but rather having an endless string of uncredited roles up until 1963, mostly Western and film noirs. And he also just happened to pop up in Reefer Madness as well. Despite plans to churn out a boatload of new films, it would not be until September of 1925 before the next film was released by the studio, The Fighting Romeo, also known as The Fighting Parson, a ranch-centered film starring and directed by Al Ferguson. J.J. Fleming wrote the story for the film, his only known screenwriting credit, as The Fighting Romeo would turn out to be the last film produced by that little studio out in Beaverton, Oregon. And why? Why was the studio suddenly able to start churning out films going into 1925? Why was Fleming so confident that they'd be able to produce a bunch more? It may have been money. Remember Ferdinand Schuman Henk? He appeared in these last 3 films produced by the studio as roles were promised to him by J.J. Fleming himself in exchange for a $10,000 advance provided to him by Ferdinand's mother, Madame Ernestine Schuman Henk, who just happened to be a world-renowned opera singer with money and influence. However, this was only a loan, meaning Fleming had to pay her back. By late 1925, this had not happened, and with Fleming's studio suddenly on life support, the Madame filed suit against him to recover the loaned sum. Perhaps Fleming was hoping to schmooze the opera singer, but I get the feeling that he was just too broke to pay the loan back. By September 1926, the Madame finally won the suit, and Fleming was ordered to pay that full $10,000 back. Historical documentation notes that a home that stood towards the south end of where the studio was located, built in 1915, was known as the Schuman Henk House, due to the fact that while making films, Ferdinand was living there. The house still stands to this day. By this time, the studio had long since filed for bankruptcy, and the story of Premium Pictures, turned J.J. Fleming Productions, was all but over. It's a wonder if Fleming was able to pay off this debt. He has no further film credits beyond the Fighting Romeo, leading me to believe he just washed his hands of the whole business. While what exactly led to the bankruptcy is not fully known, the lawsuit couldn't have helped. It's possible Fleming had stretched the place just a little too thin to a point where it was no longer sustainable. The main thing blamed for why the studio eventually folded was the simple fact that Hollywood was continuing to grow, and anyone who really wanted to make it headed that way. The bulk of the acting talent who worked for this studio either moved on to LA or their careers more or less folded, right with this suburban studio. Of all the films made in the northwestern portion of the state, between 1921 and 1925, all but one were produced at this studio. And if you recall, one of the first directors of this studio was a Dr. G.E. Watts. Well, in addition to having an interest in film production, he also had a love for aviation. After the studio closed down, he was the driving force in converting the space into a small airstrip, wherein the old studio building was kept and used as a factory space for producing airplane parts. Over time, the site was deemed too small, and the space, known as Watts Airport, was reestablished a short distance away. The mostly homes that stand there today show various periods of construction, with some dating back all the way to the 1940s and others being less than 30 years old. You travel through there and it's just another neighborhood. You'd never know what kind of magic once happened here.